When he stood trial in June 1936, it took the jury less than 24 hours to find him guilty of overseeing a prostitution racket. His sentence, 30 to 50 years.
It was a bombshell. It had tremendous impact politically, socially, and economically on organized crime and on the people of the city of New York.
If Lucky Luciano, the most powerful racketeer of them all, could be sent off to prison and labeled the king of the pimps, then maybe the mob was not invincible after all. Luciano's partners in crime got that message loud and clear. Meyer Lansky skipped town, relocating to Florida and Havana, where he could oversee the mob's gambling interests. Bugsy Siegel chose Hollywood, where he could expand rackets on the West Coast. But life in Dannemora prison wasn't all that bad for Luciano, who, despite his conviction, was still chairman of the mob.
He continued to run his affairs while in Dannemora. If your business is important enough, you're going to have henchmen who will come up and see you, and they'll speak in the code language.
Luciano spends his time playing gin rummy, hanging around the yard. Little Davy Patillo is in jail with him and does all his cooking for him, prepares his meals for him. Someone else does Luciano's jobs at the prison. He gets his pants pressed and his shirts pressed, and it's just a sign of his underworld reputation.
Fellow convicts weren't the only ones who still respected the power of Charles Luciano. In 1942, U.S. Naval Intelligence in New York City approached Lucky for help. A disastrous fire had recently destroyed the French luxury liner Normandy, which was being converted into a U.S. troop carrier. It sank in the Hudson River. Naval Intelligence had spotted German submarines off the coast of New York. There were rumors of sabotage along the docks. Docks controlled by Lucky Luciano and the New York mob. Then the local Naval Intelligence commander, Charles Heffernan, had a most unusual idea. Why not ask the mob for help in protecting the waterfront from the enemy?
It was kind of novel. I think his superiors responded to it. Gee, we can have the mob protecting the country. Isn't that wonderful?
So the Navy first approached Lucky's best friend and fellow mobster, Meyer Lansky. Lansky then presented the idea to the boss in prison.
Luciano did not go along with it at first. My inference is that Luciano was still mad at the law, with reason. Lansky talked him into it, said it would be a good thing for the mob to be seen in this patriotic role. And so Luciano gave his permission.
Lucky was moved from the desolation of Dannemora to a place where the chairman of the mob would be much more comfortable. A minimum security prison a few hours from the city, Great Meadow.
Your classic country club type prison. And there he could talk to his underbosses and all his men freely.
It would seem that Lucky kept his word to the Navy. The docks were free of sabotage for the rest of the war. But Lucky Luciano was not done serving his country. As American and British troops were invading Sicily in July 1943, Allied intelligence had an ace in the hole named Luciano.
All the mafia bosses had been alerted by Lucky Luciano that they should be friendly to the Allied forces, to the British and Americans, and should help to facilitate the landings in every way possible, which they apparently did.
The invasion was not only a success for the Allies, but a boon for the local mafia bosses who had followed the instructions sent by Lucky Luciano from prison in New York.
The American generals and captains were so grateful to the cooperation the mafia gave them that they appointed them mayors of cities, mayors of towns. And so after the landing was successful and Italy was reconquered for the Allies, the mafia was left in a position much more powerful than it had ever been before.
When the war ended, Luciano appealed for leniency. After all, the mob boss had secretly served his country. The government agreed to his release.
And strangely enough, the same gentleman who prosecuted him, Thomas Dewey, is now the governor of the state of New York, who would have to sign the papers to release him from jail.
But Lucky would not be allowed to stay in his beloved America. He was deported back to Italy. Under the terms of his release, he would be placed under the surveillance of the Italian police and never allowed to return to the U.S. On February 10, 1946, Luciano sailed out of New York Harbor. To ease the pain, Lucky's old friends in the mob had given him a sweet going-away present.
All the bosses contributed some money to a big, fat envelope of cash. Just before the ship got underway, they handed him this gigantic envelope, which had about $300,000 or $400,000 in it. He felt very good about that.
Officially, Luciano was forbidden to leave Italy, but 10 years in prison had not dulled his sense of cunning. Lucky would not only evade Italian authorities, but establish a new power base for himself in his native land. In late February 1946, after spending 10 years in prison, the deported king of the underworld, Lucky Luciano, arrived in Naples by boat and set foot on Italian soil for the first time since childhood. Waiting for him at the dock were the Italian police, who questioned him briefly, then set him free. Even if it meant defying the terms of his deportation, which forbade him to leave Italy, Luciano was determined to rejoin his fellow gangsters and to resume the only career he knew, that of a racketeer. After only 8 months, Lucky fled to Cuba, a mafia paradise.
It was a totally corrupt society run by a dictator who was taking money and bribes from American gangsters to run the casinos there. So it was seen as an open town, Havana, for the mob, so Luciano probably thought he'd be safe there.
Safe enough to call a summit meeting in April 1947 of all his mob associates, both from New York and around the country. It was a huge gathering, including, among others, Meyer Lansky, Albert Anastasia, Carlo Gambino, and Frank Costello. Among the crowd of celebrated gangsters was a real-life celebrity named Frank Sinatra.
The excuse for the meeting was to celebrate Frank Sinatra and listen to his songs, but he was just a front. And during that meeting, they laid down the law on such things as the heroin route from Sicily to Cuba, then from Cuba to the mainland of the United States. And Luciano was the chairman of the board at that meeting.
Other issues on Lucky's agenda? The division of profits from Cuban casinos and what to do about his childhood friend, Bugsy Siegel. Bugsy had been careless with mob money and had lost millions of dollars building the Flamingo Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas.
There was a great deal of disappointment in how Ben Siegel had operated that business out there. He had been warned again, and he's not responding. We have to do something.
Lucky made a ruthless decision. It was time to teach Bugsy the ultimate lesson in mob business, that money is more important than friendship.
They sort of held a kangaroo court there and decided what are they going to do about Bugsy. And Lucky said, you got to kill him. That sealed Bugsy Siegel's fate.
On the evening of June 20th, 1947, in the Beverly Hills mansion of Bugsy's girlfriend, Virginia Hill, Bugsy was brutally murdered. After the summit meeting, Lucky wanted to stay put in Cuba and run the international heroin racket from there. He got along just fine with the corrupt government, including the dictator Batista. But a certain nosy agent from the U.S. Bureau of Narcotics named Harry Anslinger got in Lucky's way and pressured the Cubans to kick the gangster out.
He said that Luciano was going to be using Havana as a pumping station for illegal heroin into the United States.
Luciano thereafter calls Anslinger Ass Slinger and sees him as his nemesis and worries about him, and I think that's quite revealing. The reason Luciano was worried about Harry Anslinger, Ass Slinger, and the Bureau of Narcotics was that Luciano actually was involved in heroin trafficking and was worried that the Bureau was going to nail him for it.